right. Thank you for being here. Today is Monday, December 16th. We're thrilled once again to have another super webinar for the NBDA community. The title of today's event, Navigating Lithium-Ion Battery Hazardous Materials Shipping Regulations, and what bicycle retailers need to know. We're thrilled to have George A. Kerchner, Executive Director of PRBA, the Rechargeable Battery Association, here to guide us through a webinar on what we need to know when it comes to shipping e-bikes, lithium-ion batteries safely. There's several regulations, and George is going to walk us through those. We hope that this webinar today provides a valuable opportunity for retailers to ask questions and get those answers. So I urge the people in attendance today to please place questions in the chat or Q&A, and we will have a session following the presentation where George will review those and answer those in depth. There's a lot that is happening with latest regulations, compliance requirements, and we want to make sure retailers are equipped with the best practices. So definitely, please submit those questions as we go along. George, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Heather. Appreciate that introduction. And as Heather noted, we are, this is I'm going to call it a high-level overview of the U.S. hazardous materials regulations that apply to lithium-ion batteries and battery-powered vehicles or your e-bikes. I'm going to also call it general awareness training. There's about 35 PowerPoint slides here. And I'm not going to kill you with PowerPoint. I mentioned to Heather afterwards that I will provide these slides to her that you can get posted on your website there. And it's really good information if you've got little knowledge about the regulations, or even if you have a lot of knowledge about these regs. It's always good to get a refresher. The one thing I want to drive home here is that the regulations can be overly complex when it comes to shipping lithium batteries. E-bikes, battery-powered vehicles aren't too complicated when you're shipping by ground. And again, it's one of those things. I know your membership waste batteries or use batteries for recycling, and sometimes they might ship new batteries. We're focused on both used, new, as well as the e-bikes. So as we go through this, and like I said, we'll take questions at the very end. I'm focused on ground transport here. That's what we decided to do. It's my understanding that very few of your members or any of them are shipping by air. So this is all about shipping domestically within the United States. And I'll talk a little bit about the international regs as well, but we're really focused on domestic regulations here and shipping by motor vehicle or by ground. If you're not familiar with PRBA, 30-second overview. We're based in Washington, D.C. We've been around since 1991. We represent many of the major manufacturers of rechargeable batteries as well as non-rechargeable batteries. Our members include the major manufacturers of those batteries, electric vehicle manufacturers, portable electronic equipment manufacturers, battery recyclers, hazardous materials consultants, retailers. It's a pretty diverse group. And we're actively involved in these regulatory issues from top to bottom. The transportation issues are absolutely a very, very big part of what we do. We work very closely with the U.S. Department of Transportation as well as their international counterparts. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. There's no secret here that lithium batteries present a risk in transport. There have been dozens, if not hundreds, of incidents involving lithium batteries over the years in transport. Some of these photographs are some I'll call relatively recent incidents that have gotten the attention of the regulators. There's a pallet of cell phones here on the right at the Hong Kong airport a few years ago. This cargo vessel, the Felicia Ace, was filled with electric vehicles, now sits at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And this February 2023 FedEx trailer incident, there were two trailers here, had a couple electric vehicle batteries on it. Those kinds of incidents continue to get the attention of the regulators. And as a result, lithium battery shippers like yourselves are under the microscope when it comes to the US DOT. So just keep that in mind. I mean, there are just, as we know, just hundreds and hundreds of shippers of lithium batteries. And unfortunately, some of those shippers aren't well versed on the requirements or the risk these batteries present in transport. This slide here, it includes a video. I'm not going to play the video, but I'll pass that along to Heather. It just is a really good training video for your colleagues and for your industry generally, recognizing that I don't need to show you videos of batteries catching on fire. You know they present a risk if they're badly abused or they're poorly manufactured. But this video does a great job of conveying the hazards with the batteries in terms of the temperatures they can reach up to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, The gas coming off those cells and batteries can be flammable and toxic gases. And therefore, you've got this unique chemical and physical hazard when it comes to lithium batteries. Lithium batteries are very safe. There's no question about it. And we use them daily, as we all know. But when things go bad, and they have gone bad with lithium batteries, lithium-ion specifically, those risks are very serious. And it's just, well, it's good to be educated on those risks. So again, we're focused on the hazardous materials regulations here in the US. And in the regulations, the Secretary of Transportation defines a hazardous material as any substance or material that is capable of posing an unreasonable risk to health, safety, and property when transported in commerce. That is, when you go to offer a package to FedEx, UPS, your LTL carriers, whoever, you're offering hazardous materials in commerce. Your company, if you're packaging and offering those materials, you are the shipper. The shipper is responsible for compliance, for identifying and classifying the materials in accordance with the regulations, and you're on the hook for compliance. And so again, it's all about the shipper and making sure that your company, when you package it, label that box, prepare your shipping papers, you're fully compliant. Here in the US, we have the US Hazardous Materials Regulations found at 49 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. These regulations are multimodal. In this book, which is about 2 inches thick, it covers ground, sea, air, rail. It covers all modes of transport. So it's all inclusive in this one book. Internationally, we've got a set of regulations that are started. They start at the United Nations, where PRBA actually has a seat at this subcommittee that develops these international dangerous goods regulations for transport. Those UN regulations go into the IMDG code for ocean transport, into the ICAO technical instructions for air transport. And we've got this generally harmonized approach across the globe for shipping dangerous goods, what we refer to as hazardous materials here in the US. Your companies are probably getting these materials from Asia, your batteries, your e-bikes and so forth. Most in cases, they're coming over from Asia, and your suppliers are shipping in accordance with the IMDG code or the ICAO technical instructions, or another set of air regulations known as the IATA dangerous goods regs. The point of this slide is this: we have in the US the 49 CFR regs for hazardous materials. Internationally, we've got these dangerous goods regs for different modes of transport. The good news generally is they're harmonized across the globe. Same labels, same markings, same packaging. And that's a beautiful thing in terms of making the regulations relatively easy to follow. One thing I want to touch on as well, and this came up, I think, at one of the seminars or webinars that you all were hosting, this question about UN testing for lithium batteries. In those international regs that I just referred to, and in 49 CFR, there's a set of regulations that the lithium-ion batteries that are in the marketplace must be tested to, and that includes cell phones, batteries for notebooks, batteries for power tools, batteries for e-bikes, batteries for electric vehicles. All those lithium-ion batteries are subject to a series of tests known as the UN 38.3 test, which are found in the UN Manual of Testing Criteria. Okay, so your supplier, that manufacturer of that battery, has gone and done the testing that's required, or he should have, before he offers it in transport. One of the things that accompanies the documentation of that testing is something called a test summary. It's a document that lists all the different information about the battery manufacturer, the testing lab that did the testing, the specifications of the battery, where it was tested, contact information. It's all got to be there. And so if you're unsure, what I always recommend to companies is it's not a front burner issue for you, but it's probably a good thing to do from a due diligence standpoint, to go out and ask your supplier, your battery supplier, for the test summary associated with the batteries that you're placing onto the market. Again, so if you're shipping new product out the door, whether it's an electric vehicle, whether it's an e-bike or a standalone battery, you really should have a copy of this test summary in your files. Electronic version's perfectly fine, but any reputable battery manufacturer is going to have that test summary available. And if, again, as the shipper, if you're going to offer a package of these batteries for transport, you really should have that in your files in the event that the U.S. Department of Transportation comes knocking at your door. So if you're new to the hazardous materials, or what sometimes referred to as the dangerous goods regs, recognize there are 9 classes of hazardous materials in the regulations, not only here in the US, but also internationally. Lithium-ion batteries and battery-powered vehicles, or your e-bikes, they fall into this Class 9 miscellaneous category, which is a beautiful thing because there are lots of exceptions in the regulations for Class 9 hazardous materials. By comparison, your lead-acid batteries, your starter batteries in your vehicles, for example, they have corrosive liquid inside, therefore they're regulated as Class A corrosive hazardous material. So two good comparisons. You've got Class A corrosive lead acid versus lithium-ion batteries that fall into this Class 9 miscellaneous category. So our focus today really is 2 things: shipping lithium-ion batteries. The reference to the Code of Federal Regulations is 173.185. And then battery-powered vehicles, or your e-bikes, fall into section 173.220 of 49 CFR. So that's just citations for you in the event you wanted to take a look at the regulations after today. But those are the 2 sets of provisions in the 49 CFR, really, where you'll see most of your requirements. And if you look at the hazardous materials table in the 49 CFR, you'll see 3 entries for lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion batteries just as standalone batteries, batteries packed with equipment, and batteries contained in equipment. Okay, so that's just for the lithium-ion batteries. Each one has a specific UN number or identification number, UN 3480 and 3481. Down below, there's 3 entries for lithium metal batteries. So there are 2 types of batteries, lithium batteries on the market: lithium-ion versus lithium metal, and I'll touch on the differences between the 2 in terms of how they're regulated. One thing I want to emphasize today is this word exceptions. If you're shipping hazardous materials, specifically lithium-ion batteries and battery-powered vehicles, you need to understand what this term exceptions means. In the regulations, they do provide relief or exceptions. Some people refer to them as exemptions for certain smaller lithium-ion batteries, and in your cases, battery-powered vehicles or your e-bikes. And so keep that word in mind: exceptions versus the opposite of that being a fully regulated hazardous material. Okay, so exceptions versus fully regulated. The difference between lithium-ion and lithium metal in terms of how they're regulated by the DOT: we've got lithium metal batteries, and they're regulated based on their lithium and their grams of lithium metal per cell or battery. Okay, in lithium-ion, because there's no metallic lithium in those batteries, they're regulated based on their energy content, in that case, watt hours. Watt hours is relatively easy to calculate. You take your nominal voltage times your capacity in amp hours to get your watt hours. A very, very simple calculation. Okay, so that's the distinction between the 2 chemistries there. For battery-powered vehicles, or your e-bikes, and that's how they're classified, you've got an entry in 49 CFR with a UN number of 3171. You've got exceptions for those battery-powered vehicles as well, which you find in the regulations. And special provision 3134 in the regulations is very important because it defines what's considered a battery-powered vehicle. Okay, so going to special provision 134, you'll see it says, for the purpose of this special provision, vehicles are self-propelled apparatus designed to carry 1 or more persons or goods. Designed to carry 1 or more persons or goods. Okay, so that's a scooter, that's a hoverboard, that's an e-bike, that's a full-on electric vehicle. It could be a drone that's been designed to carry goods, for example. And then they give you some examples of what's considered battery-powered vehicles, and you notice that bicycles are listed here. Riding lawnmowers, for example, are also considered battery-powered vehicles. So again, it's a very, very broad definition, I'll say, of what's considered a battery-powered vehicle. And that's very fortunate, and in a sense that you've got a very, very generous exception from the regulations when shipping your e-bikes and so forth. The question that comes up a lot is, do I need hazmat training? A lot of times you do need hazardous materials training when shipping hazardous materials. But under the exceptions, that's one of the things you get relief from. If you're shipping under the exceptions, training is not required. It's only when you're shipping fully regulated hazardous materials is when the training requirements in 49 CFR kick in. They're very prescriptive in terms of what's required. It's required every 3 years of your employees. So again, the employer is responsible to ensure that their employees who are preparing hazardous materials for transportation, and that could be packaging a battery, putting labels on a product or on a package, preparing shipping papers, all that's covered under the hazardous materials training requirements. So again, really important to recognize that training is going to be required in some cases. If you're shipping waste lithium-ion batteries, for example, the larger batteries that don't qualify for exceptions, you're going to need some training to be compliant with 49 CFR. Keeping copies of those training records is very important as well. And again, training is required every 3 years by the U.S. Department of Transportation. So what's the big incentive for training is staying away from these civil penalties that the U.S. Department of Transportation can levy against your company. Civil penalties up to $99,756 per day per violation. Higher penalties if there's an incident involving your battery and transportation, that's up to over $232,000. And then there's criminal penalties up to $500K and up to 10 years in prison. And again, some fairly common violations where we see, improper packaging, failure to do the training, lack of labeling, no shipping papers. Those are pretty big fines. The law firm that I'm associated with here, Wiley, I mean, we've represented a lot of companies over the years that failed to comply with the regs, and it gets very expensive very fast. So this is your incentive to get a little bit of training done, be familiar with the regulations, and recognize that the training is not complex. It covers basically 4 areas: general awareness, which is what we're doing right now. Function specific gets into packaging and labeling and shipping papers and so forth. There's emergency response and safety information, or emergency response and safety, that's part of it, and a little bit of security training is required as well. Again, there's a lot of companies that offer this training. We have members who are Hazmat consultants who can provide this training. There's online training you can do. There's live training online you can do. I know there's recorded training online you can get. Sometimes that's not real effective. But a group setting of, you can get multiple companies to do a live webinar, and the training could probably be done in 4 to 5 hours. The training really is intended to show you the type of packaging and labeling as required for lithium batteries. And here are some common labels and marks that we see in the regulations, what we call hazard communication. The 3 most common marks and labels we see, I've highlighted here or circled in red. Again, this is just some example of the labels and marks we see for hazardous material shipments. Lithium batteries specifically, we see a lot of these labels and marks on packages. But again, it's all about the hazard communication for the carrier, that is FedEx and UPS, when they come to pick your package up, for the sorters at the FedEx and UPS facility that are sorting literally thousands of packages on a daily basis. They need to know what's in that package, and that's what hazard communication is all about. So this is going to take a minute to explain, but this slide is intended to convey to you where the exceptions are for smaller and what I'll call medium-sized lithium batteries, and where they're considered fully regulated. So stay with me here a little bit, and as I walk you through this. The way this is set up is that it's this: if I have a battery that's less than 100 watt hours, and I'm shipping it by motor vehicle or by ground here in the US, there are exceptions that apply to that shipment, whether it's a standalone battery, whether it's a notebook, a tablet, a power tool. If it's less than 100 watt hours, there are some very generous exceptions in the regulations. In the US, and it's somewhat unique to the US, there's another exception for what we'll call medium-sized batteries between 100 and 300 watt hours. I'm going to keep it on the ground by motor vehicle, and there are going to be some exceptions here. I don't think, and again, I'd be interested to hear from anybody after when we get the Q&A. I don't believe there's any small e-bike batteries below 300. There might be, maybe some low end, I don't know. Scooters certainly could fall into that category, but that's the medium battery exception here in the US that's very generous. They don't have an equivalent in Canada for that, but again, a very generous exception there for medium-sized batteries. And then the larger batteries, over 300 watt hours, shipped by motor vehicle, you're now fully regulated. We'll call those the larger batteries or large batteries. Again, small, medium, and large, that's the defining line where you see your exceptions for batteries less than 100, between 100 and 300, and then over 300 for the fully regulated. And as I said, on the right side here, very generous exceptions, but when you get over 300, the exceptions disappear. You become fully regulated. UN performance packaging requirements kick in, and I'll explain that in just a minute. Need to be accompanied by the hazmat shipping paper, and of course the training requirements all kick in there. So big difference between accepted versus fully regulated, that's for sure. So the four basic steps for complying or shipping lithium batteries in accordance with the regs is this. You classify the type of battery you have. Okay, what is the watt hour rating? Is it 300? Is it 200? Is it 500? Is it 800? After you know that watt hour rating, you select the type of package you're going to be using. Again, if you're using larger batteries over 300, you might need what's called UN performance packaging. You identify the correct labels and markings, prepare the shipping paper. There's a process in place for that, and it's a pretty well-established process, not only for lithium batteries, but other hazardous materials or dangerous goods. I'm going to take 2 minutes to explain what I mean by UN performance packaging, because this is very important, especially if you're shipping new batteries out the door. UN performance packaging is generally required if you're shipping fully regulated. There are some exceptions to the rule, but it's packaging that's been tested, been sent out to a lab to make sure it's robust and can withstand normal conditions of transport. It's generally recognized, okay, these hazardous materials present a unique risk in transport, therefore the packaging should be robust. And again, the packaging goes through in various tests, stack tests, vibration tests, drop tests, etc., to ensure it can withstand normal conditions of transport. The last bullet point here, lithium-ion batteries shipped for disposal or recycling do not require UN performance packaging. That's a big deal. That's a big relief from the regulations. That's one exception from the UN performance packaging. So when I talk about UN performance packaging, this slide here is really to convey what you typically would see for what we'll call a fiberboard box. And you see the marking down here with the letters UN and the circle through it. That is just to convey that this is a packaging that's been through the appropriate testing requirements. I won't go through what all the letters and numbers mean, but just recognize this is your typical 4G fiberboard box that's used in the US UN performance packaging. Packing groups come in 3 different levels: packing group 1, 2, and 3. Packing group 1 being the most stringent, packing group 3 being the less stringent. Lithium batteries, in most cases, require a packing group 2 fiberboard box. When you use performance packaging, 2 things to remember. You need to follow what's called the closure instructions. There will be instructions on how to use that package. They might be printed on the box. It might be coming in a report in a PDF file. But you can't use UN performance packaging without following those closure instructions. And you need to have a copy of those closure instructions at your facility. They're very specific, they're very prescriptive. It will tell you, for example, how many strips of tape go across the top, how far down that tape goes on the side of the box, how wide the tape is. Maybe there's foam on all 6 sides. Maybe there's vermiculite, 3 inches of vermiculite in the bottom. Again, when you're using UN performance packaging, it's super important that those closure instructions are followed and you've got a copy of your facility there, okay? So you know where the exceptions are, you know how to ship full, you know what fully regulated means. We talked a little bit about performance packaging. I showed you some of the marks and labels we've seen on packages. I'm just going to walk you through a 3 slides here that show where the labels and markings apply for accepted batteries, fully regulated batteries, etc. So on your screen here, I've got a box. If I'm shipping a small lithium-ion battery and I'm shipping it by motor vehicle in the US, this is an accepted shipment, whether it's a power tool battery, a small scooter battery, whatever it might be. It's less than 100 watt hours. It's accepted from regulation. I still need some hazard communication marks and labels that's shown here. These are examples of the lithium battery mark, the cargo aircraft only label, and some alternative markings over here on the right-hand side. I put my packaging requirements on the left to make sure that they're packed to prevent short circuit. The box is robust, can withstand a 1.2 meter drop test, and the gross weight of the package cannot exceed 30 kilograms or 66 pounds. So again, I'm UN 38.3 tested. I'm less than 100 watt hours. I'm going to stay below 30 kg for the package. I can take advantage of my exceptions and ship small batteries by ground in the US using that package there. By comparison, and this is really the only slide that I have on battery powered equipment, but if you're like me and Amazon comes to your door twice a week with all kinds of stuff, oftentimes it'll be a lithium-ion battery powered product. And that you'll see that when that box shows up on your doorstep, you'll see this lithium battery mark with the UN number 3481 to convey that there's a lithium-ion battery packed with or containing equipment. Back here, it's 3480 for batteries. In this case, 3481 lithium-ion batteries packed with or containing equipment. I know that's not an issue for you guys. Generally speaking, you don't ship equipment, but it's good to know the difference between the two. Moving on to the medium-sized batteries. Again, I've got small batteries, medium batteries between 100 and 300 watt hours. I'm keeping it on the ground. This, again, is an accepted shipment, very similar to what we saw before, just a slightly different marking requirement. I do have my lithium battery marked with the 3480 UN number. I've got this statement, however, that says lithium batteries forbidden for transport aboard aircraft and vessel. So it keeps it off the planes, it keeps it off the boats, but I keep it on the ground here in the US. So again, some of your members may have batteries up to in that 100 to 300 watt hour range. We see a lot of these in the outdoor power equipment world and in other parts as well. So again, one of those things that here in the US, we have this generous exception, what I'll say for medium-sized batteries. And then once you move over to 300 watt hours, this is where they become fully regulated. Okay, this is where things get a little bit more complex. The UN performance packaging starts to kick in, following closure instructions, having a copy of closure instructions, etc. I've got my class 9 lithium battery diamond shaped label on my box. I've got the proper shipping name and the UN number, the address is on the box, and I need a hazardous materials shipping paper. Okay, so there's a lot going on with this package compared to what we saw under the exceptions. Under the exceptions, you put a couple, maybe a label and a mark on it, package to prevent short circuit, out the door it goes. Here, I need full-on hazmat training. I need a hazmat shipping paper. I need to retain that shipping paper for 2 years. I need all the marks and labels that you see on the packages. Obviously, you're going to pack it to prevent short circuit, etc. So a lot more involved when you're getting into batteries over 300 watt hours, which again, for your industry, I'm assuming this is the sweet spot when it comes to shipping lithium batteries. So what does my box look like when I'm shipping a battery powered vehicle or an e-bike? What you see is what you get. That's not a mistake. Your box doesn't require any marks or labels if you're shipping an e-bike with the battery installed. Under 49 CFR 173.228.220H is where you find your exceptions for battery powered vehicles or e-bikes. And the language is very important. It says shipments made under the provisions of this section are not subject to any other requirements of this subchapter for transportation by motor vehicle or rail car. That means no marks, no labels, no shipping papers, no training required of your employees. I can't tell you how fortunate your industry is to have this very generous exception with really no limit on the watt hour restrictions when you're shipping e-bikes. As long as that battery is installed and is packed to prevent inadvertent activation of the e-bike, it's packed to prevent short circuit, prevent damage that could lead to a dangerous evolution of heat. It's pretty straightforward. And honestly, I'm a little surprised the industry still has this exception because there's nothing, honestly, I don't think there's anything unique about your products that make them say safer than an piece of outdoor power equipment with a large battery that's 800 watt hours. It's just that these exceptions have been in the regulations since the dawn of time. And so you should feel very fortunate to have the exceptions, and obviously you want to take advantage of those if you can. When these products come over from Asia, and this is a good point to make, is that there is no exception really for shipping by vessel or by air. So when those packages end up on your doorstep, let's say you go online, you order an e-bike from overseas, it should end up on your doorstep with a box with a label that looks like similar to this Class 9 label without the battery pictogram in the middle, and marks and labels on it and so forth. But again, the exceptions aren't the generous exceptions we see for shipping by motor vehicle here in the US are not in the international dangerous goods regs, when you're shipping by vessel or ocean or shipping by air. Okay, so It's just that here in the US, once you have those materials, you can take advantage of the exceptions by ground. I will tell you that the regulations starting next year in 2025, and there's a 1-year transition period into 2026, the regulations for battery-powered vehicles are changing. There's no question about it. There's going to be a different UN number. Instead of the UN 3171, it'll be a different UN number. There'll be more prescriptive packaging requirements, and there'll be additional labeling and marking requirements. And again, that's for international shipping. You're still going to have the ground transport exception here in the US for your e-bikes. That won't change next year, but for international shipments, you may see some changes there. As far as the hazardous material shipping paper requirements go, again, for fully regulated shipment, this is just an example of a bill of lading or a straight bill of lading that you might see to meet the hazmat shipping requirements. It's somewhat prescriptive. You need to fill out all this information on your shipping papers. A lot of times this is done through software that's provided to you by your carrier, like FedEx, UPS, etc. But again, this requirement, it's not required when you're shipping under the exceptions. It's what kicks in when you're shipping fully regulated. And again, that's one of those additional burdens that comes with shipping fully regulated hazardous materials. I wanted to point out this emergency response guide for lithium-ion batteries. If you're looking for information just to have at your facility or your location, you can get this online, this emergency response guide. It's a really good guide for 2 reasons. One, a copy of this should accompany your shipments along with your shipping paper. And second of all, it's just really good emergency response information when it comes to lithium-ion batteries. But again, this is something that's published every 4 years by the Department of Transportation, Transport Canada, and the Mexican transport authorities. And it covers all the different hazardous materials. Here, I've just got guide number 147 for lithium-ion batteries, but good information to have. A few things before we wind up here I want to touch on is shipping damaged, defective, and recalled lithium-ion batteries, shipping waste batteries as well. But when it comes to damaged, defective, or recalled, or what is commonly referred as DDR lithium-ion batteries, because they pose a higher risk in transport if they've been damaged, or maybe they're being recalled, there are more stringent packaging requirements for those. And trying to decide what is considered damaged or defective. So I've given you some examples here, the listing the 5 things to consider if you think you might have a damaged lithium-ion battery. That would then trigger some additional requirements for packaging. A lot of times you will see metal drums, small metal drums, while that is a 55-gallon metal drum. There are smaller packing group 1 UN performance packaging metal drums that are out there that can be used. In most cases, they are fully regulated hazardous material shipments that require, again, very robust packaging, a lot of different marks and labels, the use of something like vermiculite or cell block inside the drum, etc. There are some special permits out there that have been issued by the Department of Transportation that give you a little bit of relief for shipping DDR lithium batteries. But this is just an example of if you were going to ship it in full compliance with 49 CFR, the packaging can be over the top. There's no question about it. Okay, so DDR lithium batteries present some unique requirements for you that you need to be aware of. When it comes to shipping lithium batteries for disposal or recycling, there's some good news here. The most important is that you don't need UN performance packaging in most cases when you're shipping batteries for disposal or recycling. So you've got that relief from performance packaging. You also are accepted from the UN 38.3 testing requirement. So if you're shipping a battery that you're not familiar with, you're not on the hook to make sure it's UN 38.3 tested. So those 2 things they've carved out when shipping batteries for disposal or recycling. However, I want to emphasize this point because this tends to fall through the cracks for a lot of companies. Whether you're shipping new batteries or whether you're shipping waste batteries for recycling, the US hazmat regulations apply in both cases. Yes, there are some EPA requirements you need to keep in mind when shipping waste batteries, but in the big scheme of things, the hazmat regulations apply across the board, whether they're new, used, damaged, whatever they might be. So again, used batteries are regulated not that much differently than new. Used batteries are regulated very similarly to new batteries, okay? Except we've got this exception from performance packaging and UN 38.3 testing. So again, used batteries have caused, unfortunately, batteries being shipped for disposal or recycling have caused a number of incidents over the last couple, 3 years. And I know the U.S. Department of Transportation is very concerned about that. And we know as more states begin to adopt regulations mandating the collection of used batteries, we're just going to see more and more of those, going to see more and more of those batteries in transportation. Okay. Lastly, I want to touch on what's called special permits that have been issued by the U.S. Department of Transportation specifically for your industry. We have a couple members, Service Solutions, Call to Recycle, that have been issued special permits by the U.S. Department of Transportation that helps them to, facilitate the collection of used batteries. And those special permits have specific packaging, marking requirements, and so forth that are a little bit different than everything that I've just covered for you over the last 30 minutes. So all those marks and labels that I just showed you, those are specific to 49 CFR. When you get issued a special permit by the U.S. Department of Transportation, they often do require the same markings and labels, but they also may require some additional marks and labels. I'm most familiar with the Call to Recycle program. I know they have special packagings that are all pre-marked and labeled for you. They have drums, et cetera. And I think they have a training program for you or anyone that uses their used battery collection program. But again, keep in mind that if you're using a permit, and you're using Service Solutions or you're using Call to Recycle, their permits that they do have do provide some additional relief from the regulations. For example, you may not need shipping papers or you may not need training for your employees. So again, take what I described earlier and recognize that these permits that have been issued by the DOT to these other companies may modify those requirements a little bit. So don't get confused when you get a special permit and it says, oh, you don't need the training. But you're going to say, well, George Kerchner just said I needed the training. The permit takes precedent over what I just said there. So keep in mind that the permits, they're great documents to have because again, they help to facilitate the collection of used batteries in a lot of cases or damaged defective batteries. Basically what I'll say is an alternative to what's required by 49 CFR. Okay. So that's it. That's, a couple more slides. Sorry, I thought I forgot to throw these in here. There are provisions in the regulations for what's called materials of trade, and it allows you to transport your hazardous materials in direct support of your business without being subject to the regulations. This provision is found in 49 CFR 173.6. And essentially, it allows you, if you're taking, batteries or I'll use batteries as an example, to transport batteries to a certain location as part of your business. Okay. And then these materials of trade exceptions say, yes, you can do that. And you get relief from the regulations. There are some limits to the materials of trade provisions. Packages can't exceed 30 kg. You can't have more than 200 kg of batteries on the vehicle. And you should mark each package that it's got lithium batteries. And employees must be trained on the materials of trade requirements. So again, this is a provision in the regulations that you can be used if you're transporting hazardous materials in direct support of your principal business. Again, it's nice to have without being subject to all the requirements of the regulations. There are some changes coming to the materials of trade provisions over the next year or two, which I think will help the industry. But keep in mind that this is a nice provision to have there in the event that you find yourself that you need to transport lithium-ion batteries in your company trucks or personal vehicles. There are some limitations and there are some requirements there, but generally there are some very generous relief on the regulation under materials of trade. And I think that's it. Yep, that is it, Heather. So I'll stop there. I've been going for about 35 minutes or so. I'll be glad to answer any questions if there are any, but
George, I can't thank you enough. There's so much here. I'm trying to take notes as you're going, and I'm so happy you're going to provide the slides for us. We do have a couple questions, and for our attendees, this is a great time as well if you haven't had a chance to place those questions in the Q&A or chat. Let's start with this one, George. For customers or individuals, are now any legal, safe, and cost-effective ways to ground transport their e-bike batteries? And I know you covered this a little bit. Just looking for maybe, I guess, customers, riders, if they want to ground transport their e-bike batteries. Best to go through some of the regulations that you already reviewed, but anything else you would throw onto this, George?
So I guess is the question going to batteries or the e-bikes?
The
I guess,
batteries
yeah.
themselves.
It's a really good question. We've got these products here that are fully regulated, and the regulations really aren't set up for consumers to walk up to a FedEx store and say, "Can you please ship this 800 watt hour battery for me?" They won't take it, obviously, at the FedEx and UPS stores. The training doesn't apply to consumers, but the rest of it does. Shipping papers, labeling, packaging, the whole thing. So the short answer, unfortunately, is no, there's no safe. Yes, there is a safe and legal way to do it. It's just that consumers can't do it easily. You have to find a third party company to do that. And there are third party shippers out there that can do that for you. Absolutely. You can walk up to a third party logistics company. I've got one here not too far from my house in Annapolis that will package and ship it for me. Unfortunately, it's going to cost you a couple $100 to do that. And if you want to put it in the air, it's going to cost even more. So it's those third-party logistics shipping companies that are able to do that for you.
Excellent. Thank you, George. Another question here regarding what's coming down the pipeline. Do you anticipate anything in the next 1 or 2 years that should change in regards to shipment of lithium-ion batteries?
The only big change that's coming over the next 2 years is, and it mostly focuses on air transport, and that is, and I know that's not an issue for, I think, most of your members, but it's probably worth noting. Today when you put a lithium-ion battery in the air, it's subject to a 30% state of charge. Starting next year and in 2026, that will apply to battery-powered vehicles and also to lithium-ion batteries packed with or contained in equipment. Now, when it's contained in the equipment, it's a recommendation. It's not a mandatory requirement, but packed with and battery-powered vehicles over the next year, 2 years, you're going to see a change to the state of charge requirements when you put them in the air. Again, the other changes is again a different UN number for battery-powered vehicles. The US will be very late in picking that up. So again, instead of 3171, I'm going to say 30. It's either 3556 or 3356. I forget. I should know that off the top of my head. But that's the big change with a new UN number. Instead of UN 3171, we'll have that different UN number for battery-powered vehicles. So that's probably the biggest change. So you may start, if you're receiving these packages from overseas, you will start seeing new UN numbers, and you may see more labels and marks on the packages because there are some. They did up the bar a little bit for packaging and labeling these for shipping by ocean. So you may see more labels and marks on your packages when they land on your doorstep. But for ground transport here in the US, I don't expect any big changes over the next year or two.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's see, any other questions? One here from a retailer. I work with bike flights, and working with them, it seems I can ship any e-bikes without concern. Do you know anything about that program, or is this?
Yeah, I'm generally, I've heard of it. They offer a service for shipping your e-bikes by air, correct?
Yes, but not into Alaska or Hawaii. Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Their service is limited to ground service. That's what it
Oh, it
is.
is. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
so the question is, if they're a retailer that works with bike flights, they don't need anything special, and question mark. Like bike flights takes care of it all, correct, George?
Right. I mean, again, for ground transport, these, again, as long as the e-bike, the battery's installed in the bicycle, again, you can remove the front and back wheels, and there's a provision in the regs that clarifies you can dismantle the bicycle and put it in a package, but as long as that battery is installed either in the frame, that still can, for ground transport, there's really, again, it's about as easy as it gets. I mean, again, I've got the box up on the screen there. There's no marks, there's no labels. It's a very generous exception. So consumers today, again, they can they can ship these without training, shipping papers or anything like that. So that's the one very generous exception the e-bike industry has. Versus if you were going to go ship a battery as a standalone battery, then life becomes somewhat miserable for you. But once it's installed in the vehicle or the e-bike, life is pretty simple. As long as you can meet these requirements for, short circuit protection, protecting the battery from damage in the package, etc. If you put that box in the air, that's when it becomes more complicated for sure.
So maybe a great takeaway for retailers is ground shipping, and with the battery installed in the bicycle is going to be the easiest way to do it with the least frustrations and extra steps at this point.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions from our attendees? These are fantastic questions coming in. Georgia, it looks like we have covered all the questions that have come in at this point.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Fantastic presentation for our attendees. Thank you for being here. There was lots of information. As we stated, this will be recorded and the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel within 24 hours. And also I'll connect with George and we'll get these slides into the NBDA member resources area. George, thank you once again. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Take care.